All right, so let's talk about research papers. So maybe you've probably done research papers before, but we're going to talk about how to do research papers at the college level, what's expected in college level writing, all of that. So let's get started. So research papers. So what is it? So it's a document that presents original research to an academic audience. So you have to be, when you remember how you're supposed to keep your audience in mind, right? So this is an academic audience. So specifically, I am the audience, right? But you have to keep your audience in mind though when you are producing something. So you can't write something for on an elementary level or something like that. It has to be written at a higher level. So we'll talk a little bit in this presentation and in another one about how to help get you to that higher level of writing. So what's the point of research papers? Like, why do I have to do one of these? So firstly, to share the results of whatever you studied with others. So it's usually, at least for my class, I try to pick things that you somewhat can be invested in and that you find interesting. Obviously, I give you some kind of guidance with what to write about, but I don't specifically choose every single thing that you write about. So because I want you to have some input and I want it to be something that interests you. Also to demonstrate that you've done your research. So that's also why you do a research paper, because you do your research and then you present your findings in the form of a paper. And it's also to show how your research adds to the field of study. So believe it or not, there are people who do this kind of stuff just to grow other people's brains. So it's amazing. I am one of those people. I enjoy doing this, but just like you, I don't want to research something that I don't care about. So, and honestly, when you get into the graduate level courses, so if you go into master's or doctorate level stuff, a part of you have to write a dissertation or a thesis, which is basically a really large paper. But you pick something that, first of all, has to be researchable, but then you have to pick something that you think is interesting, and that it's like you look for a hole in something in the world, like a hole in a thought, because it can't be something that someone's already done, we've already kind of figured out. But so you have to kind of fill that hole and figure out what it is, that question is that you want to answer. And then that's what you research. But it also has to be something that you can find enough information about too. So there are different types of research papers or research texts or whatever that you can do. We are going to do one of these in class for this. So the first one is a research article. So that's basically when you present your research in a text and then you submit it to a journal. Then there's also a conference paper, or it's also called a conference presentation, and that's when you present your research at a conference. So up in front of however many people, and you're speaking and you're presenting your findings. Then there's also a conference poster. So that's when you put it into a visual format, which we will do something similar to that later in the semester. Not with this paper though, but that is a similar thing. And then also a research paper, which is what we are doing. And it's research prepared for a course assignment. So you're welcome. So depending on the field that you are in, so say you've declared your major, you're a microbiology major, or you're a history major, something like that. There will be different things when you get into those higher level classes where you have to write in this certain type of format. For our level, for a freshman level writing course, I do a mix of both, so you can kind of get exposed to them before you have to venture off into all the other stuff. But what format you use, meaning like APA or MLA, will depend on the field that you're in. But also just the different things that you include in a research paper can differ depending on the field. So for science and social science fields, are the things on the right there, those are what you would have. Basically, those are the main components and the main like sections of your research paper. So you typically have an abstract, an introduction, you have a literature review, you have methods where you give your results, and a discussion, sometimes it's called conclusions, and you also have subheadings that you often divide things up into, and they're clearly labeled and all of that. In the humanities, so like English and stuff like that, you have your intro, you have your methods and your results, like your findings, and your conclusion. But you may or may not have subheadings. It usually depends on what your teacher says to do. So the science ones are a little bit more strict and more itemized on the things that you need to have in there. It's not quite as structured for the humanities. Both, though, you have to have detailed evidence to back up what you're saying. So that's one thing that we are talking about a lot this week and next week is having evidence, having quality evidence, because if you don't have evidence, I mean, who knows that what you're saying is accurate, right? Also, the citation styled for that field, like I mentioned earlier with the MLA and the APA. So, this paper will be MLA, but say you're in a, like I said earlier, microbiology class, 3 years from now, then you might have to write a paper in APA. So those things can differ. Also, specific vocabulary for that field or vernacular, certain terms that they might use. So those are things you need to keep in mind whenever you write an academic paper. Also, you always keep a formal style. Academic writing, that's, you're not going to say gonna or, any other little kind of conversational thing. So when I think of formal style, it's kind of snooze fest, but it is like, how is it when you read a textbook? Is it like so entertaining? Or is it like, okay, it's just very straight and to the point? Okay, and that's pretty much how academic writing is. So, and which is also more like technical writing, if that is something that you like and that you're interested in. So, strategies for academic research. So, how do you do your research properly to specifically fit a research paper? So, an academic research paper. So, these are similar, well, they go along with our steps of the writing process, but it's not all inclusive because, as you see on there, I don't have the publication part, or it's not, doesn't specifically say peer review or whatever. But these are just overall things that you need to look through at each of these steps. So we've got the pre-writing, the drafting, the revising, and the editing stages. So during the pre-writing, these are the things that you need to do. So, or you have to keep in mind. So the most of your content will come from your research. Okay. So, and I have a sheet that I'm giving you guys with how to structure, I call it the writing strategy sheet, on how to structure each paragraph to make sure you don't have too many quotes and you don't have too little quotes. And that way it's just like the right recipe for having the content, and then or having the source information and your own words in there. You may need to do some preliminary research on the topic to kind of identify your research question first. So I kind of call it pre-search, where you're like, oh, well, I don't know if I want to do this or that. Just do a little pre-search, look a little here and there, and just kind of get an idea, because if it's something that is boring to you, then you don't want to be stuck with it. So you don't want to get all the way into all the research and you've already done it all and you're like, oh, I hate this. So I like for you guys to do a little bit of pre-search to figure out if it's something that you want to do, because otherwise you're stuck with it for 2 weeks, and that would stink if you don't enjoy the topic. And also determine what kind of research you need to do. So, is it like a science type of topic, and then you're thinking, okay, I might have to look at like medical journals or something. So you kind of have to think, okay, where would someone with this particular topic get their information from? Maybe it's like something you're writing about, you're researching on Hitler or something like that. So then you're not going to look at science journals, right? You're going to look at, history, or maybe like political science things, and things are in that kind of realm. Next is the drafting or organizing strategy. So the organization, typically it needs to be organized by your intro, methods, results, conclusion. Even if you don't label them, I'm not big on having you guys label essays, and that's not a thing. If you enjoy to label your essays, cool, go for it. But basically it comes down to intro, body, and conclusion. But just make sure you're kind of touching on those different things, and that will help you make sure that you've got everything you need for your research. So the first thing you need to do, like as far as like your writing part goes, like your process of your writing. So organize your findings, like from your research, and then write that part first. You know, a lot of students want to I just want to write from the beginning to end and just do it sequentially. And that's a terrible idea. Your brain wants to start at the content, but sequentially you want to start at the very beginning. Okay. And you just got to roll with it and just do what your brain wants to do and start at the content. If you're worried you'll forget to have your introduction, sometimes I'll like type introduction really big where I want it to be, and I highlight it in Google Docs. And then the same thing with conclusion. That way I don't forget to go in and add that. So first thing you need to do is just write the body first. After you've written your body, then that's the second part. You go in and then you give your overview of the topic. This is your introduction. And then like you talk about what your research question was and your main claim, because it's so much easier to talk about what you're going to write about once you've already written the things. So it definitely makes that process easier. Then last is when you write your conclusion. So that's when it's a reflection, so to speak, of the things that you already have written about. So keep in mind like what your study showed and areas that future researchers might address. So that is something that researchers, they love the quest for knowledge. So, keep that in mind when you're doing that. You're on a quest for knowledge, to learn more, to grow your brain. So think about like what other people in the future, like what kind of things might they want to research on that same topic. The next topic is revising. So, and that's like looking at your style too. So you are revising like normal, and like we've talked about previously, but you also have to keep in mind that you need to have a more formal style than your narrative paper. So all research genres should be written in the style of the discipline that you were in. So it can differ a little bit. Like the sciences have their certain way they like to have things written, and English people have their different ones. So that can kind of differ. That you really don't have to worry about for this class, but that is something definitely to keep in mind in the future. Use vocabulary that is formal. Okay, even your sentence structures. That's something you also need to pay attention to. Take it up to that next level. Think about like if you're going to email your best friend, how are you going to write that differently, and what kind of language might you use that's different than if you were going to write the Queen of England, right? So it's probably going to be a big difference. So think about, you actually do change your language for that. You might say the same, you might intend the same thing, but you are changing your vocabulary, and you might present yourself more fancy or whatever if you're emailing the Queen. So that's just something to keep in mind with your style for keeping a formal style for your research paper. Again, use a more formal style. Don't be too informal. So this is a scholarly audience, so you have to be more formal. Make sure you're not using slang. Like I said earlier, like gonna, and don't say like, I'm going to tell you about blah, blah, blah. So don't tell me what you're going to tell me about. Just tell me. I can figure it out on my own what you're going to tell me about, because you'll just start telling me. The next is editing. So think about the design. This is actually something I expect for you to already have together before your rough draft is turned in. And actually, Google Docs, handy dandy, they already have the templates in there for MLA and APA. So as far as the margins, spacing, and all that stuff go, unless you go and like clear out a bunch of stuff and it messes up the formatting, it's already built in there. So I have no problems with you guys using that. I think it's super handy. I want you to focus on your content more than worrying about trying to figure out the margins and docs. But I do expect you to be able to recognize the things in the parts of MLA formatting and, all, APA and all that kind of stuff. So it is important, but I'm more focused about your content. So as far as the editing and the design part go, it's always a simple font. Anytime in APA, MLA, any kind of formal paper, you're not going to get the little fancy curly Q fonts. There's a meme I like, and it's like, if you turn anything with cute fonts, I will light your paper on fire. So, which is true. And if I have to read like, oh my gosh, so many essays, and then they're like, 5 pages long, it's so hard to read. Format, MLA, APA, whatever it is your teacher tells you to do for that particular paper. And margins and spacing. So follow the guidelines for whatever format you're told to do. So if it's MLA, there is a standard way it needs to look. So if you aren't sure what it's supposed to look like, if you don't remember, or if you are more visual, look at Al Purdue. It's amazing. So they not only give you step-by-step directions and like, oh, this is exactly how, this measurement for the margin, blah, blah, blah. They also give you a picture to look at, say, oh, this is what a sample page looks like. And I think that's very handy. Citations. So that is definitely, you have to have your citations in there. So these come in 3 different ways. So you have your in-text citations. So those are any reference to your sources in your paper itself. So that can be saying the author's name or or like the title of the work. You can also using your paraphrase or using a quote. So any of those are all in-text citations because they are in the text. Then there's also parenthetical citations. Those are also in the text, but those are the ones that are set off in parentheses. And there is a specific way to do both of those depending on the format of MLA or APA. But again, websites like Citation Machine and BibMe and all of that, they have it where you can just put your information in there and it does it for you. It's not always 100% correct. And you always also have to make sure that you have all of the information that you have available to you in there. But it still is super handy. And lastly, the works cited page. These are for all the sources that you used in your research for your paper. And it's all listed at the bottom of your paper. And if there is a source that you use, then it has to be there. If you did not use that source, then it should not be in there. Okay. So, and for every source in there needs to be some sort of in-text citation that connects to it in the main part of your paper. All right. So lastly, the organization for your paper. So you have your intro. That's where you're going to introduce your topic. You're going to have your thesis statement in there. Your body, that's where you present your findings and all of that. And your conclusion, that's where you're going to rephrase your topic, your question, and your findings. And then you have your works cited page, and that's where you cite all the sources that you used, and they're all listed in there in alphabetical order. And that is it. Those are the sources the source for this presentation.